The Finks got wind of it in advance. I don't know how, but they ended up organising a hit on our Christmas party. You talk about the movies and the Wild West.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it looked like. It was. I've never seen anything like it. I was just shocked. There was just fights up and down the street. My eventual mental collapse had happened at the peak of my career, just after one of the best achievements of my whole life.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with retired Detective Sergeant Craig Semple. Craig, welcome back, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, so we've got you down in the Riverina area, but you've made a move up to the mid-north coast or north coast of New South Wales. Talk us through that.
Yeah, look, I think for me, I was getting pretty burnt out down at Wagga. We'd been running pretty hard down there, and like I said, I don't stay in the one place for too long, and I think for me at Wagga, when I started locking up the kids or the people I've locked up, I've been there too long, right? So,
Okay.
so anyway, things were really struggling at home, and I was starting to think about a move.
How many kids have you got at this stage?
Three.
Is it the three boys?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I had two, and one was on the way.
Right.
And so, look, I was thinking about places I could move to, and I ran into a couple of mates at the Crown Hotel of all places, as you'd expect in Sydney on a job, and they told me there was a vacancy at Grafton. So I thought, geez, it'd be good to get back to the coast. I love the ocean so much. So yeah, we went up, had a look, and we decided to move to Woolgoolga, which is in between Grafton and Woolgoolga to Coffs Harbour, but it was right on the coast, and we decided to set our family up and have a new start up there, and at the start it was really good. It was a good move.
Was that for professional basis or more for personal?
It's more personal, I think, for me. It was a little bit professional from the point of view of, like we talked about, staying fresh, and I just felt like I was so burnt out at Wagga. I had done one rotation in uniform just to have a spell from plainclothes work because of just what we'd been flogged with, and that was during the Royal Commission and post-Royal Commission years too, which was pretty brutal.
Let's talk. I remember the days well, and it made me even more determined to be a detective because we were really undervalued at that period of time, weren't we? With the Royal Commission, because there was shame that was brought on the role of a detective with what came out in the Royal Commission, but senior police weren't very supportive of detectives, and there was talk about who needs detectives, we'll send them all back to uniform, that type of thing, and we really had to struggle to survive.
It was survival, and it was a big fight too. Like, we had to fight hard to retain what we had, and it was people who just either had no respect for what we did, that were the main pushers of all these things, or there was also a period of time, as you remember, where it was almost like a rite of passage for promotion by going in and sinking a cop or something like that. There was all these witch hunts, and I still remember the police forces even putting ads in the paper for people to put anonymous complaints about anyone they wanted to. It's just like, what? So the prestige of our job got really badly eroded, and with all that criticism, I think it started to get me down a little bit as well, and you start to question, why am I making all these sacrifices, both professionally and personally? And this is the blowback on us. So I think I just needed a fresh start. So when we went up to the North Coast, it was I really did feel like I was doing that for my family. It was, we were getting out on the beach on weekends and doing some pretty nice stuff, and so that was good. But then obviously it didn't sort of take long before the work hit me like a train.
What section were you working in? Grafton Detective's Office? Yeah,
I was in the Grafton Ds, and at that time they'd just been through an internal investigation, and although everything was not sustained, it still took its toll on the crew up there, and the detective sergeant who was running the office, he ended up on long-term sick report and didn't come back. So I rocked up at Grafton, and I found myself in a relieving team leader's role as an acting detective sergeant for the best part of 2 years, and I'd had a little taste of leadership at Wagga with going to uniform, working as a sergeant, but there was another level, just rocking up into this new place and then taking over the office and running it, and we were so understaffed, Gary. It was just, I've never worked at a place that was so under-resourced than Coffs Clarence Command. I mean, when they eventually did the review on detectives' numbers in the state, they gave us an extra 10 detectives in one go based on a caseload.
I remember that. You were copying a flogging, weren't you? Because
Belted.
it's not a quiet spot either.
No,
work-wise.
and you're on call all the time in those places. And basically, we had one of our surviving detectives on a cold case murder, the Lee Stace matter up at Broom's Head, and basically left 3 detectives in the office to run the whole Clarence Valley of 100,000 people in that sort of area. And it's sort of, I don't know, it's one of those things where it just didn't seem to stop. So we had 3 blokes to share on call.
Let's explain the on-call, because we understand it, but it might be talking shorthand. But basically, you work the day. It's not sitting at home waiting. You've got to finish your shift. But then when you leave work, you could be called back 5 minutes later, half an hour later, or in the middle of the night.
It is...
and you've got to cover 24/7. So with 3 blokes, you're basically on call the whole time.
Yeah. It was like we had that, paramedics, and the ambulance officers, they sort of do the same thing out there as well. And what that means is you just never relax. You can never, even when you're not on call, because there was only 3 of us, if one got called out, it's likely he's going to be calling you as well so that you can go in helping. So every time the phone rang for me, I was always on edge. Is this work? Is this work? Is this work?
Craig, I just interrupt there because you just triggered something. When I left the police, the thing I couldn't get used to initially, and then I find that the greatest joy in life is the fact that you're not a slave to your phone.
Yeah.
When you were a working detective, the phone would ring constantly, and not just ring and you could deal with it by a conversation. It rings and you might disappear for the next week.
Mate, I when mobile phones really kicked in and we were a slave to them, I longed so much for the days where I could have my pager back. It's just you get beeped and you think, well, am I going to answer that or am I not? But it's just sort of, with the phones, it just became, you just get tied to them. And you know, even before the mobile phones were really kicking in, I still had, I always had a phone hooked up next to my bed.
Yeah.
For the obvious reasons. And so, yeah, it was really, I think it's something that we don't give enough consideration to, the impact of how that sort of intrudes into your private life and how, you know, your hypervigilance and other things that we have struggles with as it is, when you've got that potential for whatever you've got on, you know, whatever your plans are could be disrupted at any moment.
Well, you basically you couldn't plan.
You can't plan. You
had to accept that you're a phone call away from missing whatever you've been leading up to.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes when you did plan things, and it's probably some of the things I've had trouble adjusting to after the police as well, is allowing myself to enjoy fully the excitement of leading into a plan, because we've had so much disappointment over the years. It's sort of, and I know my partner, who she's an absolute beautiful woman, she can't understand sometimes when I'm not getting, like even with the book getting launched and all that sort of stuff. It's like, Craig, you're not getting excited. I just don't get excited about stuff until it happens.
Yeah, see, that's another thing that you carry, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Hadn't even thought that way, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, being on call was a real burden, and for me being on call too, because I lived down at Woolgoolga, it was a 60k drive each way up the Pacific Highway. So I got to do that going to work and then get called out during the night and do it again. And often the call-outs would be the furthest end of our command, so that'd be up at Iluka or somewhere like that, which was an hour and a half drive from my house. So, you know, even the most simple 1 hour call-out would be pretty much take you out of play for the night.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot going on up there. It was a tough place to work.
It was well, it is a busy area. There's something that happened there that I heard about when it happened, obviously, but it was significant, and it's when the Finks OMCG, so the bikies, crashed a police function. Do you want to talk us through that? Because I don't think people... It sounds like a scene from a movie, a Wild West movie, but do you want to describe that?
It sort of felt like it was at the time because, look, I hadn't had a great deal of interaction with bikies up until I went to the North Coast, and they're just everywhere up there.
Yeah.
And but I still, up until that point, because that happened in 2004, and 2003, Christmas 2003. So So I still hadn't had a great deal of personal interaction with them, and so like we'd done a few jobs, and it weren't jobs that I'd been running. I'd just jump on a search warrant and help out
Yeah.
with different jobs that had been on. And we ran one job on the Finks. It was State Crime Command ran it, and we helped with it. And I know my brother came up with one of the buy bus jobs on one of their high-ranking members, and fired a ferret round through his car, and so so the pair of us don't like bikies very much, but it was all straight down the line. They're doing bad stuff. We're investigating it. There's nothing outside of that. So when we had our detectives' Christmas party, and it was only a couple of days after solving a pretty brutal homicide, and so we were sort of like having a really good night. It was just nice and relaxed. It wasn't just us there as detectives. There was. I mean, my wife didn't go to these functions, but some wives did, and there were prosecutors from the DPP. Everyone was there, forensic
Okay,
detectives.
so it was a Christmas
as a
drink for your colleagues.
And anyway, so long story short, they basically, the Finks got wind of it in advance. I don't know how, but they ended up organising a hit on our Christmas party. So what happened? They got a couple of Finks members from interstate, a couple from Sydney, one from Queensland.
So a plan that wasn't just a bump into each other at the pub.
Planned. And they got rooms at another pub that was pretty friendly to bikies, and organised a maxi taxi so they get a big driver on the one vehicle. I think it was about 6 all up, and they directed the driver to the back laneway of our hotel, nowhere else, to the back laneway where they couldn't be seen. And a lot of what we know now has come from the CCTV footage afterwards as well, and witnesses, but. They gave the driver of the cab $50 and directed him to wait there, and told him it wouldn't take very long with what they were going to do. And they came in, and we had no idea that they were there, right? And we were in an outdoor dining area, and myself and one of my workmates had gone in to the pub because they're going to shut our area down. We thought we'll find somewhere inside. While we were in there, this one bloke, he got away from the main group.
Yep.
And he came in. And he bumped into my mate from behind, like put the shoulder in, and nearly knocked him over. And we sort of didn't even realise he did it deliberately because we didn't see it.
Yeah.
And so my mate just said, "Oh, sorry, mate, I'll get in your way," and then walked off to get drinks. And this bloke yelled out something pretty like offensive to him, and I thought, what's going on here? And I just took one look at him, and he was a typical steroid, bulked up, muscly. Dude and I didn't know he was a bikie. There was no colours. He had gold all around his neck, big neck tattoo, and I thought, shit. So I just leaned down and said, "Mate," all he did was say sorry, and then he just king hit me.
Yeah.
I just had no idea for a couple of moments what had happened. Hit me fair in a draw, knocked me back out of the side of the cameras that we had in the pub, and as much as back then, I didn't consider myself much of a fighter. I also didn't have a glass jaw.
Yeah.
And I think he was shocked that he didn't put me down. So he had a glass in his hand, an empty one that he brought in with him as a weapon. And as I moved back towards him with my fist up, he just pegged it straight at my face. And I got my arm up just in time. It was just purely reflex. Like looking back on the video footage, I couldn't believe I actually managed to do it, especially after having a couple of beers. So, but it's the glass smashed on my arm, and it didn't do a great deal of damage, but enough to get a couple of stitches. And anyway, security jumped in, pulled us apart, and he was putting on a pair of metal knuckle dusters at the time.
Fair income. So they've come in for business.
Oh yeah, 100%. And one of the staff members had actually seen one of the local bikie members making a call from the pub while he's looking outside at our function before the cab turned up. Anyway, so I thought that was the end of it, and then one of the detectives' wives had come inside, and she was just trying to mop the blood off my arm, and then I saw all these shadows and yelling outside the pub through the smoke glass windows, and I thought, the fuck is happening out there?
Yeah. So
I opened the doors, I pushed her out of the way, and I think I might have even tipped a table over, and I just ran out. And when I looked out there, mate, it was what you talk about the movies in the Wild West.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it looked like. It was, I've never seen anything like it. I was just shocked. There was just fights up and down the street with my workmates and all these guys who I had no idea where they'd come from. Because what had happened, this guy had been dragged out to another bar, regrouped with his mates, and then they came out like a tornado.
Then they came back in.
Yeah, through the outdoor area where most of us were. And I was sort of shocked into inaction for just a moment, and then I was into it.
Yeah.
And so it was a pretty big fight. And anyway, the uniform blokes eventually turned up, and we got quite a few of them in the bin that night.
Yep.
That charged. And but mate, I was just like, I went to hospital, got a couple of stitches. One of my mates had his head. He was knocked unconscious, and then they laid the boot into his head while he's unconscious in the ground. And
Dog act.
Yeah, dog act, and he had really bad concussion, so he didn't get out for the night. But afterwards, mate, I was just so shocked that these guys had just crossed this line.
It's a line that doesn't happen very often. There are occasions where threats and physical violence come in, but to do that, what did they think was going to happen?
Well, in the end, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but not much did happen.
Yeah, I picked that up in the book. So you got a melee, a brawl. It's obviously who the instigators are. But how did it play out in court?
So, look, at the end of the day, it was so badly handled. So 3 of them pleaded guilty. But the guy who glassed me and the guy who did the head kicking, both those guys went to trial. So it was a malicious wounding on me. And we were so poorly supported by our command back then. It was like senior managers had told us, we're the victims of the crime, and in the cops they've got this big push for victim care for people we're looking after, but the same amount of care is not actually attributed to our own people
when it's the police. Yeah,
when we're the victims. So we were told we could only go to Sydney and give our evidence, get straight back on in our car and drive back home. We couldn't be there for the trial. We couldn't witness and sit there as victims of crime and be there in the trial. And see how the trial ran, and maybe help advise the prosecutors and all of that as well. But, mate, the biggest letdown, so there was that side of it, but the biggest letdown was the DPP. And what they'd done, because they were pretty short-staffed down there, a week out from the trial, they realised that they didn't have the job allocated to any lawyer whatsoever.
A week out.
A week out. So they outsourced it. They contracted it to defence lawyers in town, people who we normally are our opposition, who have absolutely no interest in supporting.
Probably couldn't care less if the police had been.
They couldn't care less. So there was fundamental flaws in the whole trial. They didn't do any pre-trial witness, briefings. They sit down with the witness and go through their evidence and everything. None of that. There was no interaction. There was no talking about where they could see we needed to concentrate on different parts of the brief. When I was actually giving evidence. On top of the DPP not being there to prosecute it, the judge that they brought in was some retired civil court judge that they brought in, so he didn't even have expertise in the criminal justice system. And we were every single witness, including us cops, that were called to give evidence, we were just like lambs to the slaughter. There was no objections to any of the outrageous sorts of allegations.
So I would imagine it would be coming down. It was a melee that who knows who started it. That would be the type of defence they'd run.
And even the king hit that happened on me, it was full under a camera. And these guys are putting it out that because I was drunk, even though I wasn't. That was the other side of it too. There was no interrogation of alcohol tolerance. With cops who were big drinkers. And so we were portrayed based only on the number of beers that we admitted to having, that we were so like legless drunk we couldn't possibly have any recollection, which is so totally unrealistic, and it was never pursued. And those 2 guys got acquitted, and that was a massive, for me there was one thing after another that compounded the anger that I felt about that attack. One was the attack itself. Second was the complete inaction of our command at the time, or our commanders, to go and make sure that we took back control of our streets and sent a message to these guys that we just do not accept.
Now, if that's, and let's just flesh that out a bit so we don't sound like 2 old school cops going, no, we're going to get revenge. But I think if it's played out the way you've described, that it was basically an ambush and planned and executed, there has to be a reaction. You can't. The one thing that protects police is you can't cross that line.
No.
And for that not to be and retribution's probably the wrong word, but to clearly make make a statement, this will not be acceptable. This is not acceptable. And like, police are no more special than anyone else. But in those circumstances, that if you're attacked purely for the purely for the fact that you are a police officer, I thought the book would have been thrown.
Well, that's exactly what we expected, and I had guys from all over the state ringing up. Like, once cops all over the state, all over the country heard about it, and I had guys from the drug squad in Sydney saying, "Mate, what do you need? We're coming up. We'll give you a hand with these guys. We'll run them out of town. We'll do what we've got to do to shut all their criminal networks down." Had my brother ringing up from the TOU, from the State Protection Group, saying, "Mate, we're ready. When do you want us?"
I could imagine a lot of people would want to get involved in it. And I understand let's look at it from a managerial point of view, it can't be a free-for-all.
No.
But there should have been a very professional,
Absolutely.
concise response to that.
There was nothing.
This will not be tolerated. And I can understand why people involved, you have been a victim in the way that you've described it, would feel let down.
Yeah, it was sort of, and I guess maybe I did come from a different era of policing where you didn't let crooks take control. It's like cops run the show. It's in that criminal world, and once you start showing that you're not going to react to things like that, it basically puts out the welcome mat for others to follow with that sort of behaviour. And that's what I think it really rubbed me the wrong way. There was no satisfaction at all from as a victim for what they had done, either professionally through our work or through the justice system. We're let down by both. And that was a big turning point in my mental health where I went from there, because I had some big problems with nightmares from homicides and other things, but I'd lay awake at night just consumed with anger about everything that had happened. And even and there's probably a lot of cops out there who probably resonate with this, is that we wouldn't talk about it normally at work because everyone think we're crazy, but I'd lay awake at night thinking about my own revenge that I could take on these guys, and never with any intention of actually doing anything. But even just fantasizing about things like that would give me some sort of sense of relief from the anger that I was experiencing.
I think you're just showing that you're human, really. If I think it's perfectly natural. I had people throughout my career make threats against my family and that, and I wanted revenge. Yeah. I know where your kids attend preschool and that, and those type of threats. But you want an organisation that I'll put myself in precarious positions, but I'd expect the organisation to back us up.
It was a real letdown, mate.
I reckon part of it would be written off. It was just a drunken brawl, the bikies and cops. But the way you've described it, that does not seem to be the case.
Well, sort of, I remember going to one of the senior managers one day and said, "Mate, when are we going to do something about this?" And he basically just said, "Look, we're going to let it go. We'll let it get sorted out in the courts, and maybe we'll get some phones off or something later on when it's getting close to court." But none of that was ever going to happen. And it was we're just sort of brushed off. And I guess they probably didn't want to see it to be revenge either. But there is a balance there, and the balance wasn't. It was way out of balance, basically.
No, I hear what you're saying.
So that sort of, for me, like I was already having quite a few issues of sleep. But from there on in, for the next 8 or 9 years, like, mate, I hardly slept at all.
So you didn't find the peace that you were looking for?
Well, it's one of those things too with bikies up there.
Yep.
It's different than down here in Sydney.
Yep.
Like in rural country areas, they know where you live. They knew what car I drove. They knew where my wife worked, where my kids went to school. They all knew it because we're living in the same community. So, there was definitely no peace. It was, and from that moment on, it was sort of like, I had no peace from bikies at all. It was like the starting gun went off all of a sudden, and suddenly from bikies not having much impact on my life, they were never out of it.
Because they were pretty rampant up there in those days too.
Yeah, well, it was only 4 or 5 months after that we had another bikie job, Outcasts bikie gang up there. They'd had some internal strife, and one of the president and his treasurer had tried to assassinate one of the other state presidents up there in Grafton. They shot him. And mate, I worked on that one for over a year. It was just like full blown, witnesses in protection and phones off and chasing people all over the country. I got a real insight into the way they operate through doing all that intrusive surveillance
the
work.
covert stuff and keeping an eye on them. But the problem is when you are doing that, because they're still committing offences, and that's where a lot of pressure. I found some of the times where I was under more pressure in my career than any other times. It's when I'm targeting an active group. They're still out committing crimes, and you're making big calls. When do we move? If we don't move now, they're going to kill this person. That type of thing. So that adds to the pressure, doesn't it?
Yeah, we'll come back to that because that's basically one of the biggest things I had to deal with in that last bikie job that I ran down the track. So
let's talk about that. So that was the Lone Wolves.
Lone Wolf, yeah. So they're a national organisation, as you know, pretty powerful. They're one of the top, most powerful bikie gangs in the country, and I'd crossed paths with them quite a few times. We would always be doing drug jobs, and their heads would pop up in it. But yeah, it was the last job I ever ran the cops, and at that time I was being pretty manic in the way I was doing my job. Like, I was really trying to run hard now, just trying to avoid dealing with everything that I had going on in the background. And I remember when we got that allocation.
Can you give us examples of that? Because it sort of came out in the book, but you really just flogged yourself, didn't you?
Yeah, I was going pretty hard. It was sort of, I think, I had a real fear. Number one, I knew I had PTSD only from the nightmares, nothing else. I didn't know anything else about that illness. And I don't know, all the things I was dealing with at home, the lack of sleep, the hypervigilance, I just felt like my work was my escape. It was a really good way to it was a good avoidance mechanism to not have to deal with everything. And I became quite manic and I was doing my job. I would pick a job, pick a target, and I always try to set almost unrealistic goals for whatever job I ran. But then we'd finish it, and I'd just be elated with the success. But then I'd need another one. And then I'd need another one.
It's like a drug addict, isn't it?
Absolutely. The more adrenaline I had, the more I needed to try to cope with everything I was dealing with. But then I came across the Lone Wolves came across, and it was, I won't go into the detail; it'll take too long. But basically, one simple armed robbery on a cash and transit security guard was a catalyst for just an mountain of trouble that would happen from there on in. Because I had a pretty good idea that it was a couple of these Lone Wolves that actually did the armed robbery. So we set our sights on them, and then, doing the usual stuff, working from the basics, going out, dusting off our informants, going in, recruiting a few, starting to dig deep under the table where people don't see. We started to get a lot of information that these guys are on a recruitment drive and they were out of control. Like, a lot of the crimes that are reported, the cops go out and they go investigate, but there's so much stuff, as you know, that happens under the table that you don't hear about. Home invasions on drug dealers and stuff. And look, I just had enough. I think I just had such enough of bikie gangs over that 10-year period that I thought, nah. It was almost like I had some sort of, I don't know, like there was just going to be some sort of showdown at some point. But anyway, I said to the boss, mate, instead of just taking out a couple of these guys like we normally do and just putting it to bed for a while, because that's all we had the resources for, we just got that allocation of 10 extra detectives. And I said, there's never going to be a better opportunity. Give me an opportunity to take a couple of the guys out of the office, and we want to go offline and work on these guys and see if we can work up a brief big enough that we can shut the whole gang down. Yeah. And that plan was something that normally you wouldn't be able to do in a regional area because of the lack of resources, and it just needed patience and time. So our plan was to build this brief up. We get phones off and do all the usual covert surveillance work that we were commonly doing, but when our plan was to, as we accrued evidence against individuals in that bikie gang, rather than going out and acting on them, because that would just tip them off that we were focusing on them, we'd just start filing them away.
And that's a full credit to people giving you permission for the plan first up, but also being allowed to do that, because that's where quite often it's, well, if you've got enough to lock them up, but we'll miss the bigger picture.
Well, there was a couple of times during the job where that nearly derailed and for that reason. But I was pretty lucky because the commanders I had up there at the time didn't like bikies very much either, and they'd had enough. And so I think there was a whole world of different
all the
things
planets were aligning.
Yeah, they were aligning in the right. Yeah, all the stars were. So So basically, like we did, and we just kept chipping away at it, and we get some evidence on the phone for a robbery. One of them had committed. Right, we just put that away. We don't need to act on that now. And drugs and all those other things that are common. But during the job, it did get risky, and the risk wasn't just personal. It was very professional amount of risk that we were taking, because there was a couple of these guys who were really unhinged and really violent people, and there were two really serious assaults that happened while we were running this job, and both the victims of those assaults, one was a home invasion, one was just some poor bloke who was looking for his daughter, and they both got so badly assaulted they were with life-threatening injuries. They were airlifted to John Hunter Hospital. This is only within a 3-week period from memory, and it was only because we had their phones that we knew. Even though the evidence wasn't quite there to lock them up, there was enough that we knew that they were our people. And so it became a real balancing act, like you alluded to before, about how long do we let this job run? Because if these guys actually kill someone, like
how are we going to justify it?
How are we going to justify it? But by the flip side of it was, if we weren't running the job, we wouldn't even know these guys did it, because there would have been no other indicators whatsoever. So we just had to do a lot of risk management. And that involved putting a lot of, going a little bit extra with surveillance techniques, listening devices and things, so we could better monitor them, and getting a couple of them on just like crap charges that we could put bail conditions on them, just to have some sort of reporting conditions and a little bit of control. So, and then we actually brought in a lot of other detectives from the office to help out as well, so we can monitor the phones 24/7, things like that.
And just talk about that, because I think you're giving us a real sense of the amount of layers that go on. But people think monitoring the phones are easy, but if you have, let's say, half a dozen phones off, and you've got four detectives, how do you monitor that? It's so hard.
Well, when we first started,
you're playing catch up.
Yeah, there was just the three of us, and that's all we did.
Yep.
It was like for the first probably, I don't know, for the operational side of the job, so we worked it up over a long period of time. But for that last 9 months where we were full on with it, we spent many months just sitting back and learning.
Yeah,
that's all we were doing, just sitting there and learning and listening. And I guess for us, it was literally hundreds of thousands of phone calls and text messages over a long period of time that you had to sit there, listen to, you categorise them, you work out whether it's any evidentiary value, all that sort of stuff. So much work involved in it, but as much, and some of it's pretty mundane. But as you know, like when you're listening into some of these people, they're not like us.
Yeah,
and you get it's a raw feed. There's no filter on it, and I've had to take over the years, I've had to take cops off certain individuals' phone lines or LD jobs because they're just like too badly affected from what they're listening to, with the evil behaviour at home, and the horrible environments the kids are in, and all that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there. That you're listening in and hearing stuff that's sends a chill down your spine,
doesn't it? And your knuckles turn white. Sometimes you just want to get in the car and go down, but you just can't. You just got to keep your professional head on and get on with it, and try to detach yourself a little bit from it. But it's hard not to. And over time too, I knew when I'd been listening in to my targets for too long, because I actually started talking like them. Like truly, their language and things would start to slip into my language, and
that's not good.
No,
I had I forget what the saying for it was, with people that spend too long on the phones, they lose, and this is just human nature. It almost becomes like a TV series to them, and they're reporting on Mavis broke up with John. It's got no relevance to the investigation, but they're living these people's lives. So I can understand. I always got to the point where if someone started that, how about we move you from the telephones and let someone else listen?
It was more for me just picking up their terms of phrase.
Yeah,
all their little. It's just their little phrases and their little comments and stuff, things like that. And I'd actually start sounding like them a little bit. And it's like, God, did I just say that? What the hell? I've been working on this job too long. So it was pretty full on. And for the resources we had, for the amount of surveillance work we had going, we ended up having an LD in a car. We had an LD in an apartment block, and all these phones off as well. It's like, normally a job like that, with state crime or some other big agency, there'd be like 20 people
What
working on it.
you're talking about, I'm thinking minimum 10 to start with,
Yeah.
and the ideal situation you'd have 20, but you never get that.
No.
Running this job, there's a lot of pressure, as you've explained. Your personal life was spiralling too. You were spiralling. It was almost like you can see the inevitable, that there's something has got to give here.
It was, mate. It's one of those things, and I've talked about this quite often when I'm doing mental health talks in general in different places, all workplaces. I talk about stress a lot, and how damage it can be to you if you don't look after it. And like, I was running at 10/10 my stress capacity for a long time, but the trouble is, if you're doing that and then something that you don't expect happens, it's enough to push you over the edge. You might be able to manage it, and I was thriving on that stress. Like, I just loved it, the adrenaline rush and being under the pump. But while I was doing that bikie job, then I had a massive family thing happen as well, with the death of my father-in-law, and that caused a massive amount of grief at home. And so, without getting all the details, it was just a huge issue to deal with, on top of right in the middle, and we were at the critical stage of that job. There were so many things going on, and it was just pretty much too much. And I knew towards the end of that job, I knew I was in a bit of trouble, because I started looking for ways to wind the job up.
Right.
And that's a clear sign of burnout, I now know in hindsight. But thankfully, my young, really eager workmates were just going, "No, mate, we've got a couple more things we've got to do with this," and they kept me, rolling forward with it. But I was just done. I was just so burnt out that I just didn't even want to do it anymore. But we just dug in. I thought, you're right, I've got to push on a bit harder. So then another couple of months of really intense work went in with UCs and undercover operatives, and running all those side of the things as well as the other things we're doing. And mate, it was just, there was only one outcome that's going to happen from that. So.
Well, it sounds like you got the tiger by the tail, and you're not prepared to let go. And,
no, that's a good way to put it.
So the end result, you had an operation day and locked them all up. And
mate, it was one of the and this is one thing I reflect on, and I've said this many times, is that if anything, my eventual mental collapse had happened at the peak of my career, and at just after one of the best achievements of my whole life, and so it gave me the opportunity to leave with pride.
Okay, so you've left at the top of your game.
Yeah. So I still remember the day we wound the job up. So we had 100 cops that we brought in from all over Sydney and everywhere, and all the specialist units and tactical guys and dogs, and we got them out at the airport at Coffs Harbour real early that morning for the briefing. And there was that many cops, we had to get someone rostered on to do traffic duty to get cops where they needed.
Big operation.
It was huge. So anyway, we did the briefing, and I remember that morning when it was my turn to address the troops and give them that last little pep talk. I just wasn't feeling it for the first time, and normally I used to relish those briefings. That
would have been scary for you.
Absolutely, and I had to dig deep just to fake it. No one probably would have noticed, but I knew. And but I still remember I got out, so I was feeling really flat. But I remember before I got in my police car to go and do my job. So that by then I wasn't just running it; I was just one small team amongst many small teams. We had 13 raids to execute that morning, all at the same time. Like, massive. It's like, so the logistical thing, massive. So but I still remember before I got my car, I looked out across the airfield and across the paddocks and I saw this convoy of all these marked police cars and vans and trucks heading out in the line towards danger for me. And for our job that we'd been running, and I just thought, it just struck me that this is my gang, and they're going out towards danger to take on these guys and to really send a clear message. Yeah. And I was so proud that morning of who I was and what I'd just achieved as a detective sergeant in the police, and so that was pretty powerful moment. But then, mate, after we did finish the job, I mean, we locked up about 15 that day, and overall it was about 25 bikies that ended up in the dock. It was
an outstanding result.
Huge, mate. Hundreds of thousands of drugs, dollars worth of drugs we charged them with, a huge commercial amount of amphetamine supplies mainly that they were doing, and home invasions, heaps of stuff, firearm offences. They had handguns and ballas and stuff. But so it was the biggest achievement of my career. Yeah. And look, promotions are around the corner for sure. At some point, I was already getting tapped on the shoulder from various bosses, but unfortunately my career didn't go in that direction.
Yeah, well, you should, just before we move on where your career went, you should be proud of doing something like that. Like, you have made a difference. If you weren't driving that, if you weren't pushing that, that wouldn't happen. And we see the violence on the streets now. Maybe they'll ask you to come back to the police. Yeah,
Smash a window in emergency.
You need, as strange as it sounds, and I know it's self-destructive, but you need someone that's prepared to destroy themselves to get results like that. And that is the price that you pay. I think if anyone takes anything away from our chat here, the type of sacrifices, the type of thing that you're talking about, that's what it takes to get the results that you got with that operation.
Mate, I've read, you probably have as well, read various newspaper articles over the years where they've done a story piece on some senior police officer. Yep. And I've always been amused when some of them will assert that they've been able to always keep their work separate from home and they never let work interfere with their family life. And you think, and I won't say names of who, but that's impossible. If you're really dedicated to the job and you're running these investigations and you're hands-on into it, you can't possibly let them not interfere, number one, with you and your own well-being, but also your family and how you interact with them as well. But it definitely did take a toll with me anyway. Yeah. And look, it's one of the things I say to people now with mental health is that you can run as hard and fast as you like I did, but unless you turn around and face your demons, you're just going to get pulled down harder in the end. Yeah.
That's you reflect in the book that there were opportunities when you had the health team looking after your welfare after the event, when you put your hand up, that if you address these issues earlier on, you might have been able to continue your career.
It was, look, down the track when I ended up at Westmead Hospital in a trauma clinic, I actually said to the doctor during the assessment process and before they took me on, I said, if I actually put my hand up when I first started having nightmares after that homicide at McLean, like 8 or 9 years ago, would that have really made a difference? And they said, mate, we could have probably had it all sorted out with about 5 1-hour sessions. Just doing some of the basic therapies they do, and then we would look after you moving forward. Because back then I wasn't busted. Yeah. And as a result of not taking those 5 sessions when I could have. Yeah. And I just feared losing my career if I'd let that little secret out about the nightmares and everything. And, as a result of not getting those 5 sessions, lost my career, marriage, had 250 hours of clinical sessions now as a result of just pushing through. So, I don't regret much in my life, Gary, but if there's one decision I would change, it's probably that one. Yeah. Go back and actually declare it and get it sorted.
Hopefully, and we've been out for a while now, they create an environment where people can put your hand up. But I would not put my hand up during my career because I'd know that will be the excuse that some boss that wants to stuff me over will go, oh, no, he couldn't handle that last one. We're not giving him this one. So you didn't have that trust in the organisation. There was a part in the book that I found very interesting, and it sort of resonated with me because I've been in that type of situation. After the bikie arrest, the major operation, you went out, you had a drink, celebrate, high-five each other as you do. And you were getting driven to work the next day by your wife and you felt flat, you didn't have much emotion and it's sort of there. And then you heard a snippet on the radio talking about your job and it even affected you there because it was sort of, that's what I've made this sacrifice for, and it's in a 10-second, 30-second grab on the radio. Is that the feeling that you had?
Mate, absolutely. And it's one of those things too where it's amazing some things. I forget a lot of stuff, right? It happens in your job, and sometimes you're talking to guys and they remind you and you remember. But some of the big things really stick with you. And yeah, driving into work, like I was a bit fuzzy. We'd had a big night out that night, but even then, all the guys were yelling out, wanting me to do another speech, and I was just thinking, I haven't got it in me. Yeah. And then the next morning, when he was driving me into work, and I was distant. I was just totally unconnected, and I felt really down. And then the radio was in the background in the car, and then the news came on, and then because I heard the word Strike Force Oriental and Low Walls, it sort of snapped me back. Yeah. And it was just like that 30-second news grab where they were just running through what we did the day before, and that was it. It just struck me that well, 18 months of my life, massive sacrifices, and I was spiraling out of control. That's what it's condensed down to, is just this.
Yeah.
And over time it's forgotten about,
Yeah.
basically, and it's sort of, I don't know, it was just another layer really of where things went from there.
Yeah, I can understand, and I've had that feeling myself on some things. I think I've given up all this for that, and I'm not just talking about the media recognition, but realising it's on the scale of things, it's not that big.
Well, one of the things that I was struck with when I left as well, and I think it's part of the reason why I pushed on so long, is that I felt indispensable.
Yeah.
Like, I felt indispensable as a detective in the cops. Like, if I'm not there doing this, no one else will be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so that was a real shock to me when I got out, because I had trouble letting go of that. But it's amazing, after a while I've been out, and then I've seen bikies are still getting locked up, and I thought,
it continues on.
But at the time you just think, they need me.
Yeah.
But then you're out and you think, well, do they really? Because it's all still just going through, and they might not do it the way I did it, but at least they're getting it done, and they still are doing it.
Yeah, wise cops always told me no one will remember you when you retire. And these are people that you look up to that would say that. But a couple of points that you bored across, that anyone that's saying they've had a stellar police career without sacrificing anything to the family, well, I'd have a bit of a closer look about the stellar career, because you've got to make sacrifices. That's what you sign up with. You sign up, and it's not a 9-to-5 job, especially if you put your hand up as a detective, a working active detective. You're going to have to make sacrifices. The journey post police. So you got to the point where you put your hand up. How was that for you? Because this is, you've been driving these people, running this big operation. You're a tough guy. Nothing's going to break you. You're going to come out on top. You came out on top, and then you realised, I got nothing.
It was, I got hit over the head with it. It wasn't even me putting my hand up. I just had to. I was just so busted. But it sort of, I was from the arrest phase of that job. It was only about 6 weeks later that I was out and never to come back.
Yeah.
So and over that period of time, I'd sort of, like, I was diving down pretty hard with depression, just from the burnout, and I wasn't sleeping at all.
And look, we're skipping over it, but you've been very honest in your book. There were times where you'd just pull up at the side of the road and just burst into tears.
I was shattered. It was. I remember I had to go and do a school talk for my son for Careers Day, and they specifically asked. It wasn't my job, but because it was my young bloke's high school, and he was really keen, I went in as one of the parents who talk about their careers. And mate, I'd just had a massive meltdown, like a big breakdown. It was the first one I actually had in front of my wife and kids that night before, and I was so busted. I thought, I'm not going to be able to get through this without breaking down and bursting into tears. But once again, just got out, pushed through it, and did what I had to do. But mate, I just in the end, I just got so broken that there was just one day I just rang up work and I went off sick. With the flu. I still didn't want to declare mental health problems, right? So I went off sick with the flu, and I made sure I talked the shift supervisor.
And it was a man flu. It was a really bad flu.
Yeah, it was bad. And I would have sounded crook because I was so tired. And then the next day I went off sick with the flu again. And then look, my investigations manager there, Radar, good bloke, and he's a good mate of mine. And he just had a sense that something's not right here. Craig never goes off sick with anything. And it's just a bit weird what's happening. He just had a feeling. So he made the effort to come out and see me, and we had a coffee together, and I couldn't lie because he could see it on my face. So I eventually fessed up to him that I'd had this big breakdown, and which I now call a breakthrough because it's probably needed to happen.
Yeah, and changing the terminology.
Yeah, and that was a psychotherapist. It was only a couple of years ago. He said, mate, you're always talking about your breakdown. Can I actually suggest that you actually maybe refer to it as a breakthrough?
Yeah.
And I cried when he told me because it felt so right what he'd said, because it did need to happen. So he taught me to go to the doctors and getting time off, and look, I just couldn't come back to it. I was just too busted. So I went off to the trauma clinic at Westmead, got all that treatment, got put on heaps of medications and stuff, but I was medically retired from the police force only 9 months after we finished that.
Okay,
that
so you must have been bad because it's pretty.
It was really quick.
Rapid.
It was.
There was something in the book that almost brought tears to my eyes. The way you described it, but deeply personal again. that you got home one day and your son, when you're going through all this, and your son had come home from school or whatever, and you could see that he was troubled or something was worrying him, and you hit him up for it, what's going on, something's not right, and he broke down and cried and said, "Am I ever going to see you happy again?"
Yeah.
Jesus.
That's still gets me now.
Yeah, well, we'll turn the cameras off. Yeah, no, that's heavy.
Yeah, it is, and we've talked about that pretty recently, actually, with the book, and it's actually one of the good things about the book and getting it out is it's forced us to talk a little bit more about it too. At least a couple of my boys who are willing to, but the oldest in particular was affected the most.
Yeah,
because the other guys were a bit younger than him, and so he's a bit more aware, and he's a little bit more emotionally intelligent, I think, as well, and empathetic.
Yeah.
And so he was devastated. He was just, and it just showed to me if he's that worried that he's come home and he started bawling about the fact that he thinks he's never going to see me happy again. Like, how much has he been thinking about this?
Yeah.
How much is he worried about? And then if that's the case with him, my other two sons similarly affected, which they would have been in different ways. So it was sort of it was really confronting. And
I can imagine.
And it still is. But in saying that too, there's a positive side to it, and we've talked about this recently. Where, and I give him a lot of credit to Huey for this. Is he said, "Dad, yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. But I learnt so much from your journey that I've been able to help some, because he's had a military career.
Yep.
And he said I've been able to help so many of my friends from what I learnt from what we experienced with you."
Oh, that gives you a warm feeling.
Absolutely. So there's merry-go-rounds and roundabouts, and so there's a lot of negatives, a lot of positives from it as well.
Yeah, but it is that you acknowledge the damage you've done to yourself, but you're affecting people around you. I know when I left the police and had time to actually step back and realise who I'd been and what I'd been, and I say it half jokingly, but it's true. I'd have to go around the people and apologise. People that were supporting me all through my career, so I could do the things that throw myself into it. That they missed out on things that missed out on you basically.
It's funny when I left, and it gave me time to really appreciate it. And when I say I had a breakdown, it was a monumental, and it was like all the armour that I built around myself over all those years had just fallen away. And even though I was different from what I was before I joined the cops, I felt like I was actually me again. And I look back on my life and the way I dealt with a lot of stuff and dealt with it poorly, particularly at home. And I did feel really guilty about all that stuff. It was the first time I actually reflected on the sort of person I'd become. So I definitely it definitely was a turning point for me in actually taking a bit of responsibility for myself. The way I'd lived my life and where I wanted my life to go from there on in as well, like as far as behavioural change. And I really wanted to make it worth it to my family that they put up with me for all those years. I really wanted to make it worthwhile to them. Look, it didn't turn out that way, but I tried really hard for a period of time to make it back. But mate, things just don't work out sometimes, and you just got to grab life and just roll on to the next one. It's not easy.
You're being kinder to yourself too, aren't you? Now you've had to learn to be kind to yourself. It's
a huge part, and I think writing the book was a part of that too. But self-reflection was a big part of it for me, and I don't think I could move on until I addressed my own personal issues and made peace with it in some way or another. And it wasn't so much apologising to others, even though I've had to do that in some respects, but it's more about forgiving myself as well, because I had a big issue with guilt and regret. And, at the end of the day, I was dealt a set of cards and I played them as best I could. And everything I did was just for the sole purpose of survival. And I didn't play those cards well all the time. But also, even when I was playing the cards bad, I was still doing a lot of good out there. And in the work that I was doing in particular, and even volunteer work that I was doing in the community. But I guess I reconciled it at the end with the fact that if at the end of my life I look back and I balance the good that I've done in my life with the bad, the good far outweighs the bad. So, that's a win for me. But mate, it was a long journey. There was 3 years where I was critically unwell. I was just spiraling out of control with PTSD and depression, and had a real battle with suicide for those 3 years as well, which scared the hell out of me after investigating so many suicides. And then I ended up having an attempt on my life, and after my marriage broke down, and that was really the turning point for me, where I just gone, I saw the impact that had not on myself, only on myself, but also my kids. And I thought, nah, no way. I've got to find a way to get my life back, and this is not going to happen again. So that was a real turning point where I then took control and decided the long road to recovery started right there.
Okay, and what steps have you taken to get there?
It was I got out of hospital and for the best part of every day for a week, I sat in my lounge room and I basically worked it through like an investigation plan.
Okay,
It's
makes
incredible.
sense.
Absolutely. Well, it's for 3 years, right? This is every time we're faced with some sort of big challenge in our professional life, we get a team together and we work out a plan, investigation plan, search warrant plan, whatever it was. This was the biggest personal challenge of my life. And not once did I ever consider to come up with a plan. And so all I'd been doing was spinning out of control, like I'm the victim of my circumstance. I didn't have control of my life. Insurance companies, everyone's looking after it now. So that was the first time I actually stopped and said, righto, you need a plan. So I worked on that for a week, and I basically went back through all the treatment plans that I've been given over a long period of time by different psychologists in different places, and I wrote a list of all the strategies that they tried to teach me over a period of time that I hadn't given a lot of commitment to, and I decided just to lock in. So quite simply, I came up with a recovery game plan, my own, and I just decided to come up with one small, simple action, how I was going to put that strategy into my life from that day on. And I made them really small actions so that I set it up to work when I was at my worst. So to minimise the risk of surrender with it. That was a really important part of it. But things like exercise, meditation, really committing to cognitive behaviour therapy and other things that they were doing that I hadn't really applied myself to. And a really good friend of mine eventually added gratitude to it and practicing gratitude, and that was pretty powerful. So I just committed to that game plan for the next couple of years and worked my way through it. And it was not like making a positive affirmation, suddenly I got well. It took hard work, and it was like a story of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 1 step back, relapse, just double down on the game plan, take another 2 steps forward. But I really, look, I guess for me, because I came up with a plan, for the first time in a long time, I actually had a sense of hope. And that's a critical ingredient in recovery. If you don't have hope and belief that you can get there, it's not going to happen. So eventually I got that, and I just kept working through it, mate. And there was times where I went close to giving up, but I thought, it just kept thinking back to that night in that hospital. And I thought,
that was the low point.
Yeah, I don't want to go back there, so get back on with it. And look, it was just got myself to the point of recovery, and a big part of that was doing a lot of volunteer work for Black Dog.
That's the thing. It's not just you recovering, getting better yourself, but you're using your life experience to help others with Black Dog and talking at schools and all sorts of stuff that you're doing now. That must give you some, because I think when you leave the cops, you lose that sense of identity or purpose in life. But it sounds like you found your purpose.
Well, it was when I was actually that week that I was out of hospital and I was coming up with a game plan. And, I thought I realised I'd been looking at my whole situation with a really negative mindset. Like I was a victim and I was a sufferer and all those sorts of things. And so my action for changing the way I've been, I just basically wanted to change a negative into a positive and reclaim those 3 years that I thought I'd lost. And so I jumped on board with the Black Dog Institute. I'd actually sent them a proposal to ride my motorbike around Australia for a fundraiser for their research, and they got me on board with a program, community volunteers going out and talking to kids, lived experience speakers in high schools. And before long, I found myself riding my motorbike all around New South Wales, calling into all these country high schools and talking to kids. And basically, some of the interactions with those kids over that period of time, mate, were just life-changing for me.
There's a couple that you've referred to in the book that kids are approaching you and saying, "Thank you, you've changed my life." And the one young girl that brought her old man into the nighttime session.
Mate, I'm not even going to talk about that one because I'll cry.
Don't start crying. If we both start crying, we cut the cameras and turn the tapes off.
But it was just so beautiful a moment. And there's another young bloke who came up to me about his mum had killed herself when he was 2, and after listening to me talk about my stuff, he said he'd been really angry and resentful at her for all
Yeah.
those years that she'd left him, and then all of a sudden, after listening to me, he just had a sense of peace because finally he realised he started to understand what she must have been going through,
Yeah.
and he let that go, and so, mate, it was just like I had an empty bucket when I got out of the cops, and these kids were filling it back up, and that was pretty powerful for me. And it was also about doing it as a volunteer. It wasn't paid work. It was I was just giving my time to go out and hopefully have an impact on these kids' lives. And then, mate, when I got myself back on my feet, I came on board with Police Legacy, and I was helping out former cops with mentoring work and worked on a program with them. And then I thought, I'm actually well, but I need to work.
Yeah.
Like I actually need to work. And for the first time, I took back control of keeping myself self-sustained. Okay, because I've been living off insurance companies with workers' comp, and geez, it felt good to be able to. And I kicked off my own business, and I thought, well, I'm already doing mental health training and education in a way, so I branched out into doing that sort of stuff.
What's the business called?
Mentality Plus.
Yep.
And so I run mental health first aid courses. I do heaps of different other things. I put transition programs together for cops that are leaving.
Yeah.
So they're being supported by the police and EML, their insurer, which is fantastic as well. That they're actually and that's all about letting these guys go. Because when I left, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know what to expect. So I'm getting these guys together at the point that they're disengagement and just running them through the process, letting them understand about what the process is with the grief of lost identity and as a police officer.
It makes a lot of sense. We spend, 3 months in the academy to prepare us for being police. We should have an academy for preparing us to get out of the police.
It's one of the things that they're looking at with the military at the moment. It's just a huge thing with the disengagement and support afterwards.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm giving back in that space too, because I'm just using my own experience, even though my journey was my journey, and not everyone's going to be the same. But I guess the biggest thing for those programs for me is just instilling that sense of hope for those people who are leaving, that, look, it's going to be a period of tough times.
Yeah.
But just get your own game plan together, whatever works for you, commit to it, and just remember Craig got through it, so you can get through it too. And I give them. I've got workbooks where I just help them set up their own game plans basically, and they can take it from there. But so I'm doing that and doing a lot of keynote speaking at different events as well. So, mate, it is. It's one of those things for me is that I had an amazing career in the cops like you, and I really look back with it with pride. But there was a 3-year period where I had no sense of worth, no sense of purpose, no self-esteem, and now I've got that back again. And the sense of purpose I get from what I'm doing now has got to be pretty close to equal what I was doing before.
I'm seeing the passion as you're talking about what you're doing now, and I dare say that's not dissimilar to what you would have been when you're driving teams for operations and that. So
a little less violent.
Okay, a little less swearing, a little less dramatic.
But it's like it is it's just a different nice and I don't know. I think for me maybe and I'm not superstitious, and I'm not a big believer in fate or anything, but I think it's just a matter of seizing opportunities and being able to identify them, and that's, I think, what I've probably done with this whole experience. And it is a bit of a I know some people see me get up and speak and share my story, and I get a lot of people coming up and saying, mate, I want to do that. I've had my own battles, but it's important for them to understand it's not easy. It's like I've had to chip away for this before I did it professionally, like hundreds of presentations as a volunteer, where I really started to drill down on what was important about the messages I'm sharing, what I was oversharing, the impact it has on me about I've got to manage self-care because you're basically reliving it every time you tell it. So it isn't easy, but it's very worthwhile, particularly for men. Men, I do a lot of work in the heavy industry, like mining sector and construction, and it's mainly because I can cut through with those blokes. They don't want to hear the fluff. They want to hear how this practically works in the real world.
I think that's what separates it from, if someone's talking that hasn't had that lived experience. You're sitting here, you've shown you can actually turn your life around. You're at a very low point and you managed to climb your way out of there. So, yeah, full credit to you. Full credit to your police career. Thank you for your police career. Thanks for coming on I Catch Killers. But more importantly, thanks for the work that you're doing now, and you should be very proud of it. And your book is, brutally honest. So, I encourage people to have a read of it and understand this is one person's journey. So, yeah, thanks so much.
Mate, and well done on everything you've done too, mate, after your career. Superb.
Oh, thanks, Craig. Thanks, Craig. And it's always good to have a chat with an ex-cop.
Good on you, mate.
Okay, cheers.